More clouds, more showers in the forecast for tomorrow. Looking at the regions in the far north, cloudy with lows of -3 and highs of 5. And for the interior, again, showers, lows of 3 and highs of 12 degrees. And on the south coast, it'll be cloudy, some showers expected, lows of 5 and highs of 12 degrees. I'll be back at 6 for tonight's news hour. Stay tuned now for Jack and his guests on Webster.
There is a philosophy there that I subscribe to, which is to try to have the professionals have as much say as they can. But then there may be a limit to that philosophy.
What's the difference between the Labour Code of 73 of the NDP and the Labour Code of Social Credit of 87?
Key difference, I believe, is that the public interest, in this case third parties, has become the dominant factor in the Labour Code of 87.
What was it in the NDP?
Free collective bargaining. That was the dominant factor.
In better times too, easier perhaps.
Yes, and I think too that in 73 a key idea of the NDP of the day was to organize the unorganized, certifications.
All right, let's get back to what some people will call the draconian powers of Mr. Peck under the Act. Is it not a fact that he can, without referring to anyone else, order a cooling off period of 40 days, no strikes or lockouts, and if the strike or lockout has already commenced, he can order it stopped?
That's true.
Is that not fearsome?
Well, that may be overreaching. I think that without damaging the intent of the legislation, that power might better be placed with the cabinet rather than with one bureaucrat.
And what are his powers in the third level of his particular powers if he has a major strike?
Well, he can order a binding settlement under final offer selection, which is a process that's not too happy one for many of us involved in the field. I don't even think Mr. Peck is likely to use that power.
Well, that's a point, but that kind of after 28 days of a major strike, a lengthy strike, he has to report to the cabinet.
Yes.
And recommend to them, does he not, whether or not they should tell him to stop the strike.
Yes. But then when they tell him to stop the strike, then he can impose MED-ARB, which is an interesting idea. He can impose a special mediator. He can impose a final offer selection. Or he can decide to do nothing.
Or he can, oh no, once he's been told by the legislature to stop the strike, he must stop the strike.
Yes, but he may decide not to use one of those particular methods.
Of stopping it, because there's another very interesting one which he can use in two levels, Public Interest Inquiry Board. What is that, as you understand it?
Well, that's normally been understood to be the old Industrial Inquiry Commission, but there's a difference. The Public Interest Inquiry Board can have, instead of just the parties involved or a specialist, a professional mediator, can have a public interest intervener. Someone who presumably speaks for the customers or third parties who are being affected by the strike or lockout.
And of course, to continue, does Mr. Peck not maintain effectively his powers on compensation stabilization when it comes to dealing with public sector unions?
If they choose to go to interest arbitration, then he still has the power to review the arbitrator's decision to ensure that it complied with an ability to pay argument, if that was made.
Now, what about essential services? The old act has been wiped out.
That's right, and that's interesting. This is quite a dramatic change. In effect, all services are subject to these new powers. So it's now a flexible concept of essential services. It's not just police, fire, hospital workers who can have their disputes ended by binding arbitration. It's every dispute. And I think a lot of people in BC probably think that's a good idea.
What is the significance of the fact that in the kind of preamble to the board it says we must all remember that we are partners in and beneficiaries of a competing market system?
Well, I think that's recognizing that the bottom line of collective bargaining is that it provides economic warfare as a way of solving an economic problem. And that sometimes damages other players in the economy.
It's a kind of free enterprise labor code in some ways, in its aspects. Is that correct?
I think it is a free enterprise. It's really a different philosophy than the 73 Code.
Now, let's go through some of the little things, because not everybody understands all of this code yet, not even those who drew it, I suspect. And you were involved in drawing labor legislation many years ago. Are you happy that the Labor Board side has been simplified so that where there is a legal or an illegal stoppage, the management or the union can go straight to court?
We asked for that reform, and we're happy that that's no longer an impediment. It means that there is a chance of better compliance with Labor Board decisions.
Now, what about successor rights? Did you get what you asked for in successor rights, which is where in complex circumstances, not so complex then, the rights of a union certification follow the transfer of the business?
We got some relaxation of successor rights. And I think our lawyers tell us that employers can, in some circumstances, now double-breast. But as the minister said, this is not an open season on double-breasting. So there is not going to be an opportunity for every construction employer to double-breast.
Well, of course, the Building Trades Council has always fought double-breasting so that a company couldn't have a union and a non-union company. But as I understand it, a union company management person can now put a substantial but minority investment into a parallel company in the same business, and the union conditions don't follow his action.
As long as he doesn't control that parallel operation. By giving up control, he can shift his operation to another
was it your suggestion or the government's suggestion to open the door a little bit to damage the closed shop?
That wasn't an issue from the Business Council, but I'm sure that some made representations about getting their apprentices onto jobs, because if they can't get on, they can't do their apprenticeship.
And previously, apprentices and trainees came from closed shop hiring halls.
That's right.
Is there any limitation, if you know, how many trainees a company can hire, even to make them unions?
There's no limitation, but I think there is usually a limitation of the number of apprentices totally on a job. So that ratio would still apply.
Picketing. Did you get what you want restricting picketing, because some considerable restriction has taken place?
Yes, we did. We were very pleased with the changes on picketing. That has always been a sore spot. I know something about this. Going back to 73, it was never the intention of the code to have secondary picketing. And so I'm pleased that finally we've got that reformed.
Does this mean picketing only at the primary place of business of the struck employer?
That's right.
That's in effect what it means,
That's right.
Now, when we come to the unions, what did they get? Well, damned little, eh?
Well, I think it depends on where you start from. The perception in British Columbia and outside is that the Labor Code was a pro-union law. And therefore, there's no doubt that this reform is a pro-employer or pro-individual employee law. But maybe there's balance because the one makes the other even out. Mm-hmm. And I think
Do you approve of the fact that the employer can insist that his last offer be voted to the union?
Yes, we ask for the final offer vote. It won't happen in every case, but it's a useful power when there is a stalemate.
So therefore, one of your problems is that you feel that perhaps too much power has been placed in the hands of one super czar.
I think we'd put it more that we're apprehensive about too much government intervention in free collective bargaining.
Because what would happen if the NDP were to win the next election and some left-winger, I mean, known as such, was appointed to the head of this Industrial Relations Council, with all these arbitrary settlements, final selection mediators, fact-finders, MEDABs, and the other ways that final offer selection?
What that brings us back to is the fundamental fact that it's going to be the quality of the people in any event that make the difference for the success of anything. The law isn't going to change fundamentally BC's labor relations.
You don't think so?
No. Either for bad or for good. That's why I think maybe the...
But I put it to the Labour Minister that never again could there be a lengthy major strike in British Columbia.
Sure there could. Sure there could. If Mr. Peck and the government realize that this is the kind of dispute that will not be easily resolved by their intervention and maybe worsened by their intervention, they won't intervene. They're fairly wise, skillful people there.
But they may be under the direction of the cabinet at some time.
Maybe. But the cabinet will also, as it did not intervene in the 6-month dispute, it had the power to pass legislation. Why didn't it? Because it knew that that dispute couldn't be resolved by intervention.
Your calls and comments to Jim Matkin of the Business Council of BC after the break. To Jim Matkin of the Business Council, there are no major contracts coming up this year.
No, this is a quiet bargaining year, much quieter than last year and much different than next year.
Will you be recommending any amendments to the government on the basis of what you've already found from the Act?
I don't think in a formal sense we will. I think we've already met with the Premier and indicated our concern about the overreaching power of government intervention and our hope that the Act is used with discretion. That's a key factor for us.
Well, everybody has respect for Peck as long as he's the Commissioner. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, I've got a couple of comments to make. If I accept what Mr. Matkin said in regards to the 73 Labor Code about it being biased in favor of labor, I have got to say, when I hear him say that he's very happy with this one, the pendulum's gone too far the other way. I don't consider this balanced at all. One of the things that bothers me is if there's no secondary picketing allowed, what is to stop an employer from having their existing shop opening up across the street and that becomes a secondary site and they run the operation out of that one? What's to prevent it? Absolutely nothing.
No, that would be prevented as a primary picketing. If they're running their shop across the street, that's a primary site of work. Secondary picketing talks about a third party, another operation that has nothing to do with the party that's in dispute, and except maybe through ownership, but not through control and
Thank
operation.
you. At least there's nothing in the law forcing anyone to cross a legal picket line, is there?
No.
Go ahead, please.
Thanks, Jack. And Mr. Matkin, I'd just like to say that I'm scared of the new regulations that have come out. But one aspect I find rather humorous is the fact that an employee who speaks out against his union has now been protected in the workplace, but an employee, say a municipal or a provincial employee who speaks out has no protection whatsoever. I'm used to work with the Ministry of Highways. There was rampant nepotism. There was all kinds of things going on that a person cannot speak out and not fear for his job.
Well, that may be, but I'm glad you raised the point. A former union member cannot now lose his job, even in a closed shop, if he loses his union membership.
Except for failure to pay dues.
Except for failure to pay dues. That's
Yes,
correct.
That's right.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, please.
Yeah, good afternoon, Jack. Mr. Matkin. In 1985 and 86, we've had a 9% decline in those 2 years of foreign capital investment in this province. Now, you as the leader of the BC Business Council, I've heard you on numerous occasions talking about the need for that foreign investment. Now, just exactly what sort of a labor climate, honestly, do you think this type of legislation is going to bring to this province, and whether it will genuinely be a magnet for foreign investment to come here? Do you honestly believe that this is the sort of legislation that outside investors are looking for to come and plow their dollars? We've been hearing that song for the last 10 years.
Good question.
Okay, my view on that is that it's not going to be legislation that's going to create the investment climate. It's going to be the actions of labor and industry and employees in creating an attractive place to invest, not the law.
It's going to be the performance. And you say we've got a few months breathing space.
That's right, we've got a year.
Go ahead, please.
Yes, sir. I've read the labor code of the previous 1973, and I don't know much about this one, excepting what's coming over your program. But what is there now that will protect the union member from the union executive, who would appear to favor confrontations, would appear to favor management? to the disadvantage of the union member, which
Okay.
in my case, which I won't go into, I lost my job and I couldn't sue them properly, successfully, I should say, with the Labor Relations Board because of restraint and other factors. But what is there in this code now that will help an individual member to take his union executive
The court. I don't think there's anything new in that.
No, in fact, the Labor Ombudsman, which was in the original code, has never been proclaimed and is still left out as a protection for individuals against their union.
It says ensures free speech for both individual workers and employers. Is that the ability to chat up during organization and negotiation?
No, that's for employers. It's in an accredited bargaining situation.
Go ahead, please.
Good afternoon. Mr. Matkin, you look like the Cheshire Cat who swallowed the cream, and I wonder where your smile will be when Mr. Monroe replaces Mr. Peck 4 years from now. I'd just like to suggest that it isn't the union climate that's scaring off people in investing from this province, that it's a Yahoo-style government. And I wonder when it's going to be that you people will take some kind of responsible position and speak out against that.
Well, we do our best to take a responsible position and speak out against the interests that hurt the province. I think we're dealing with a complex law that provides some new ideas. We've supported some of them, we've criticized some of them, and I think we're trying to take a balanced view.
Go ahead from Tumbler Ridge.
Yes, Mr. Mackin, when you're bargaining, how do you know it's the final offer that the company's making? I've been in negotiations a couple of times, and we've had 2 or 3 final offers.
That's a very good point. In fact, I think the final offer word is wrong. By definition, it may not be the final offer if the workers turn it down or...
But if the employer decides it's the final offer, he can ask the board to hold a vote, and the board must hold the vote.
That's right.
Could that not hold up the strike procedure?
Yes, that could.
And another thing, Mr. Mackin, on the fact, I don't know if it is possible, I haven't seen the wording as yet, I'm still impatiently awaiting my own copy. Is it not possible to break the current agreement by declaring bankruptcy whether or not operations actually cease?
I think that there would have to be no employees for 2 years before there would be a decertification.
Well, you'd have to go legitimately bankrupt.
Yes.
And who would go bankrupt just to get a decertification?
Yeah. If you, in fact, I think it says specifically if you go bankrupt for the purpose of decertification, it won't.
Yes, it won't affect the situation. Go ahead from Vernon, BC.
Thank you very much. Excuse me, sir. I was wondering what you thought that this new labor code, knowing the government, could cause a situation where if it is perceived that the actions of the government are unfair upon the people involved, could instead cause the unions to put the bit in their mouths and call up for civil disobedience in the same way that we had Operation Solidarity before. And it's not that the government is unknown for such actions in the past.
Well, that's one of the reasons we have been concerned about the exercise of discretion in terms of government intervention. We saw the experience in the Mediation Commission where some of the unions got the bit in their teeth, and there was an increase in labor unrest during those years.
Matter of fact, they refused to use the Mediation Commission
Yes.
way back in the 60s, that was
That's
it
right.
not? And then came the Labour Board, which provided hearings, and now here's one which seems to be overbalanced on the employer's side, at least for the moment.
It's going to be very important for the government to show extreme restraint in the use of this new law to show that it can work in a fair and equitable basis for all sides involved.
That's our message as well, caller. I think we agree that this is not to be seen as the ordinary course. It's an unusual, extraordinary fireman when there's really a chance of putting the fire out.
Did the Labour Board never have the powers of ordering people back to work or making a full 40-day cooling-off period?
This
Oh,
is
no.
my point exactly. The government has totally abstained from its response.
Just let me clarify that one thing. The Labour Board never had the power to put in its own 40-day cooling-off period.
No.
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 Now Mr. Peck has the power earlier on, and later on, if he recommends to the government, he can be told, get them back to work, and he's exerting their powers to put people back to work.
Yeah. And I think that probably is a power that historically would reside with the legislature.
Prior to now, the legislature had to be called into session to make a back-to-work order.
No, the cabinet could make a 40-day cooling-off period if there was a threat to safety and health. and the economy of the province.
One last question. Public interest could include almost anything, couldn't it? It could include the economic benefits of the forest industry.
Yes, I think it's important to realize that there is a public interest in collective bargaining. Let's not forget that those companies and unions, when they're bargaining, there is a very important public interest in the success of that bargaining. Because the success of jobs and of industries depends upon the bargaining.
So strikes might be stopped on the basis of the economic problems in BC.
They might.
And that would be good.
Well, if that's the best judgment of the public interest, yes. And that's why we have cabinets and democracies to make those judgments.
And a vote every 4 years.
Yes.
My thanks to Jim Matkin. You'll hear lots more about this as the storm brews. And next we're going to turn to teachers after the break. If I were a social creditor, I would say to Elsie McMurphy, the president of the BCTF, what are you complaining about? We gave you everything. We've given you a teacher's college, which gives you professional status, in which you will have the majority votes. 15 of the members will be teachers elected from different zones. We've given you the right to strike. We've given you the right to form a union. We've given you everything you wanted, and you don't seem to be happy. What's wrong?
Well, in fact, what's been presented to teachers in these two legislative packages that were tabled last Thursday is not what teachers asked for. And I guess one of the parts about it that has angered us most is that, in fact, it was given to us, if that's the right word, given, without any kind of consultation, that I think if we'd been able to have this sort of consultation in advance, would have avoided some of the major pitfalls of this legislation.
But will you concede that you now have a separate professional organization which you're going to finance from your mandatory dues to the Teachers College?
That's one of the problems.
Okay, and that some of your people found it untenable having one organization because it placed them in a conflict of interest position between their duties as a professional teacher and their duties in a bargaining unit. Not so.
In fact, what we had suggested to government, and we went through a lengthy process with all of our members, a 2-year discussion, finally an approval of what it was in a province-wide membership vote, that we felt that teachers' interests, their bargaining and their professional interests, were both represented best by a combination of those roles in the school system. And this is also what exists in every other educational jurisdiction in the world.
But you know as well as I do, for years, that many teachers didn't know whether they were unionists or professionals.
Well, that's always been a red herring that's raised constantly, and the answer to that question is teachers are both. We are a union of professionals. We are employees of the public, which is what it should be if we're going to have a public education system. We are also individuals with professional responsibilities in the classroom. But the only way, because we are employees, that we can support and maintain and protect our professional autonomy is through our collective actions as employees. And that's why every jurisdiction that has ever looked at this kind of a proposal has moved away from it. They recognize that the best environment in the schools, the best learning conditions for our students, the best collegial atmosphere is developed when we are a unitary organization and we are a unitary group of members in a school system.
But you knew full well that the government has resisted for many years, or rather reacted against the fact that principals, vice principals and directors of instruction were in the same union, same organization, under the same body, in a conflict of interest in dealing with their colleagues.
Well, the interesting thing is that there isn't another educational jurisdiction in Canada outside of Quebec that seems to find that there is a conflict here. And we certainly felt that, and the research tells us, that the most effective schools are those in which there is a collegial atmosphere, where people work together on the improvement of educational programs, where each individual has that kind of professional responsibility. Mm-hmm. What's been proposed in this legislation creates the role of principal as purely manager, not as an educational leader. They're charged with being the bargaining agent for the board. They have complete control over teachers' lives now. That will not create the kind of collegial, cooperative atmosphere that we need in our schools to improve education constantly, as the research suggests.
In other words, the principal previously was a collegiate college of all the teachers. Now he's the guy in the corner office acting for the board.
That's correct.
Well, shouldn't they always have been that?
Well, in fact, principals always have had some managerial responsibilities, but the direction that we have been suggesting we should go in is to create the more collegial environment that allows the principal and all of the teachers to share in the educational leadership, to support each other, and to work in a positive manner on the improvement of the educational situation.
But won't the Teachers College do that more succinctly and more clean, in a more clean-cut fashion? You've got your 20 members on the board, 15 from yourself. You will control the votes in the college.
Well, that is I think, a bit of an ironical position too, because although there is certainly a college council which will be able to take votes, all of the decisions, the bylaws, etc., of that college will have to be approved by the government. So where the autonomy is there, I'm not really sure. The difference is that now the teachers are being, under this legislation, they would be required to pay for the services that are presently provided by government, such as certification. What we've been asking for is a share in those decisions. We think it's right and proper that the government, as custodians of our public system, should have that responsibility. All we wanted was to share in the processes.
Does it change the procedure by which inefficient teachers or teachers with problems will be fired?
Yes, it clearly does. What this proposed legislation does is take away due process from teachers. The way it is right now, there is a system whereby bad reports have to be written on teachers if they're incompetent. This legislation provides for 30 days notice, and a teacher can be fired for any reason the board deems sufficient. And it's a guilty until you prove yourself innocent
Would you have no
situation.
protection on that in your union contracts?
Well, there is, in both pieces of legislation, in the Teaching Profession Act and in Bill 19, the Industrial Relations Act, there are clauses that indicate that no contract can usurp management rights. And so if a board chooses to say this is a management right, then we will not be able to negotiate any kind of provisions around that.
Where will a teacher appeal? Would he be fired by the school board and appeal to the college?
Well, in fact, it's a double jeopardy situation. If you get fired by the board, you can also sort of get fired by the college. And the college system is quite insidious. It allows, as proposed anyway, it allows, for example, if 5 people write a letter saying that I am mentally incompetent or I'm morally derelict or whatever, then 3 members of the college will review that letter and review the circumstances, and they may suspend my certificate, meaning that...
Oh, you have to have all the due process, though.
Well,
And they can't do it on anonymous letters or anything
No,
like that.
the letter would be signed by 5 people. I wasn't suggesting it would be anonymous. But the due process is certainly very slim if it exists at all.
What are you going to do?
Well,
You're just going to have to accept all of this?
No, clearly not. And I think one of the things that this legislation has done, I think in a way there's a suggestion certainly made by many people that this legislation was designed to get the BCTF. And,
apple for the teacher.
And I think that what it's done is probably make 30,000 teachers in this province pretty angry. In fact, I don't think that, I know that.
Now,
the last 3 days have proven that to me.
You're going to have 75 separate union locals in the province.
But what's happening, though, in terms of that organization, that won't be a problem. We already have 75 separate locals, and they'll continue much as they have done. But what's happened, I guess, is that we've been of the impression, and certainly our members have told us through votes, that we've been representing what they wanted, their interests. The government is saying that they don't think we have been, that they think teachers want this proposal. Well, the first thing we're going to do is take a vote. We're holding votes right now in all of our 75 locals to see just what the position of our members is. We're going to deliver that position to the government on Thursday in Victoria. In, for example, Ontario, where they suggested this kind of legislation, the Premier there said this system will never work without the cooperation and the commitment of the teachers. And I think we're going to see a system that won't work because clearly, so far, we don't have the commitment of teachers to this proposal.
So you're really back to square one, though. You've got to reorganize all over again, get money to come into the BC Teachers Federation, which you'll use, because that money will go to finance the Teachers College at your expense.
Well, there'll be, if this legislation comes into place, teachers will have to pay 2 sets of fees. One to the college, which will be mandatory, and then one to their local association in order to support the other activities that the college is prohibited.
Their local union.
Yes, their local
whichever
union.
it happens to be.
Yes, I think the likelihood of any local choosing the association route, which is suggested, is very unlikely because there's no way of resolving disputes.
Biggest
under that
crisis in the
method.
history of the BCTF, of course.
Well, probably it is because of the combination of legislation, the Teaching Profession Act and the Industrial Relations Act. And I guess our biggest concern is the effect it's going to have on kids and teachers in their individual classrooms. It's not threatening to the BCTF. We'll pull through this. There's no question about that. But the impact on teachers and on the way they're able to deal with their students in an environment that doesn't threaten them, I think is going to be severely hampered. Their professional autonomy is gone.
Your questions to Elsie McMurphy, President of the BCTF. When it comes to negotiation, school board by school board, if one is a union and one is an association down the line, they can negotiate for the same thing.
Well, on paper they can. On paper it says that either way you can negotiate your full terms and conditions of employment. But in the local association route, you can only settle your disputes by arbitration. And you can only take salaries and bonuses to arbitration, not working and learning conditions, and you can only go to arbitration if the board agrees. And so there really is no way of resolving disputes
If you're a union, you have the right to strike, except that PEC can order you back to work because it affects educational facilities in the province. You're still under the CSB for another year.
That's right, yes. It's not good news, really, no matter how you look at it. Our right says, certainly it on paper, again, we have full scope of bargaining, but what Bill 19 does is take away what they've just given us.
Because you're under the CSB anyway for another year.
For another year.
The phase out. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Jack. Hello, Elsie. I'm quite confused. I've heard the minister on television last weekend, I think, say that he had actually consulted teachers before bringing this legislation in, and I would like to know if Elsie knows what his definition of consultation is and if it jibes with hers, because I hear him saying there's no sick leave provisions anymore for teachers. The due process is really changed in a very detrimental way for both teachers and administrators. The bargaining rights are not what I understood teachers to be asking for, so I wonder if she could comment on that.
Well, certainly we have not had any kind of consultation with the minister, and even now, according to the School Act, we're the group that's supposed to represent teachers. We've had, as I said, an extensive 2-year process of ratifying a report called our Task Force on Bargaining and Professional Rights. And we've been presenting those positions to the minister. What he has come up with in this legislation is clearly not what we had been presenting to him. And so if he has been consulting with teachers, I don't know who they are, but I think...
It certainly wasn't with you.
No, and I think
maybe... With the Federation, is that correct?
No, certainly not. And I think maybe if we take this province-wide vote, he'll be able to hear the voices of some 30,000 teachers as to what they really do want.
At least you're not taking it under the new Labour Code, where you might have to take the vote at a certain time in a certain place. Go ahead, please.
Yes, just some 3 quick questions here. As I understand, I'm also a teacher, and as I understand, it was explained to us today, there will be no longer principals' reports written on teachers every 3 years. Is this correct?
No, the provision in the Act that required teachers to have reports written on them has been removed, and there is no indication as to the process that will be used to evaluate teachers. It's been replaced by the provision that says on 30 days' notice, a teacher can be fired for incompetence, misconduct, mental incapacity, or any other reason the board deems sufficient. And there is no indication of whether or not a report would be written, any discussion of the performance. It's simply the opinion of...
Was that not in there before?
Well, there was a process, though, which required that there be an evaluative report written on a teacher's work, and that there had to be a certain period of time in order to...
This is shorter, sharper, and more efficient in firing teachers from the school board's point of view.
Well, it's certainly shorter, it's certainly more efficient, but it certainly isn't going to improve the environment in the classroom if you leave teachers in that sort of vulnerable position.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, Jack. I'm a nurse. I have been a nurse for a number of years, and I believe that we were in the same position as the teachers were, we have an association and a union now.
That's correct. Did you like it?
I think it is much better because the professional part of the association looks after the professional, and we have the unions. There's no conflict of interest.
Okay. Do you agree with them?
In fact, the nurses' union, the nurses' model is one that's often compared to ours, and there's many differences. One is that the model here in British Columbia, when they separated the two arms, was following the model that exists in many other jurisdictions. Yeah. That is not true for education. This model doesn't exist in any educational jurisdiction. Secondly, the nurses, the nurses had asked for it. We asked for the exact opposite. And I think the third thing is, as I said earlier, the important thing is the educational environment in the school and the atmosphere that is there, the kind of collegial ability we have to affect improvements in education.
You sound as if everything was perfect. Maybe there are some things in the government legislation which are good.
Well, I guess the fact that they have recognized that teachers should have the right to negotiate their full terms and conditions of employment at long last is good.
Go ahead from Aldergrove.
Hello, Jack. Yes, I have a question for Elsie. It's regarding the substitutes. Where do they fit in the whole perspective of it? As I understand now that most of the local school district teachers associations bargain for the substitutes. And as it stands, most of the substitutes receive half the wage of a regular teacher.
Hold on.
Yes, that has been one of the difficulties with our lack of expanded bargaining rights, is our ability to try to represent the interests of, for example, substitute teachers. I'm not sure just what this new legislation would offer in the way of us being able to represent the rights of substitutes. Certainly it was something that we would try to do.
Go ahead from Nelson.
Yes, hello, Mr. Webster.
Yes.
I have a question for your guest. One of the things is I've just recently taken a course at one of the colleges here, and I certainly agree with Mr. Bill Van der Zam as far as certification is concerned, because one of the problems that has come up there that I've been through is the fact that there seems to be the odd teacher there that doesn't seem to have the certification.
Hold on. That surely is a local problem which should be dealt with.
Well, it would be rare that there would be a teacher without a certificate. The only time we have teachers on what is called a letter of permission is if there is it's completely impossible to fill the job without using someone who is not qualified, and then that has to be on a formal letter of permission. As
Go ahead, please.
Yes, Jack?
Yes.
My question is, have the teachers always had a vote, a secret ballot in their election?
Yes, that's correct. I assume you mean for example, the leaders of the Federation, like, for example...
No, I'm talking like, say, for strike votes or this kind of stuff. Have they already had a secret ballot?
Well, we, in our bargaining, have not been able to go on strike, and so the question is...
Yeah, but prior to you...
No. You've never had strike ballots for teachers, have you?
The only time we went on strike, which was in the fall of 1983, we had a secret ballot vote. I'm not sure if that answers the question or not.
It'll do. Go ahead, please.
Well, Elsie, you've said that we've a secret ballot, but that's not always true. You've a council. And secondly, I don't think you've all got the support of every teacher of the Lower Mainland. The BCTF is high fees, and they're not all behind you, not by a long shot. And while we're talking of that, what about all the property that we're owning? The 7th and 6th and Burrard. And, we've all put our funds in that. And why are we owning property at the same time?
Go on.
I'm not sure why we have the property. I think it's something we've had since long before my time, so I'm not sure.
I don't think the property has anything to do with the new Labour legislation.
No, I don't. But I think the caller is right. I'm sure there will be, the odd teacher who does not support the present initiative. Certainly, when we had voluntary membership before, I think in the province there were some 47 or 57 teachers out of the 26,000 who didn't
When Bill
join.
Van der Zam became Premier of British Columbia, did you not expect some such legislation as this to come down the pike?
Well, we knew that was a possibility, but he also said that he was going to have a consultative form of government. He was going to move away from confrontation. Neither has happened in this case.
And you will, as a union, become part of the BC Fed?
Well, that remains for our members to decide. We haven't taken that decision yet.
Another chapter in the lengthy story of unraveling the new Labour Code, including the teachers' problems in British Columbia. My thanks to Elsie McMurphy, President of the BCTF, which is still in existence and will stay in existence one way or another.
No doubt.
Next, something quite silly after the break. Send me... No, wrong program. Best-selling author, editor of Maclean's at one time, news director, television interviewer, sports cartoonist, columnist, evangelist. And what are you doing now, Charles Templeton?
I'm talking to Jack Webster.
No, what are you doing now, Templeton? I never thought the day would come. You are a teddy bear inventor. When your people phoned and said, when I put a guy on about a teddy bear, I said, certainly not. A crass, horrible commercial plug. But when they said it was old graying, 72-year-old Charles Templeton, I thought, what is he up to? What is this, a teddy bear evangelist?
Jack, you're jealous because you didn't think of it first.
What is it?
What it is very simple. It's a warm teddy bear. Feel it.
They have teddy bears that tiddle. It's not a tiddler.
No, it doesn't tiddle.
A little plastic bottle
what
in
it does,
and
what
you
it
fill it with warm water,
No,
and
no,
the little
no,
baby
no,
goes
no.
to sleep holding its teddy bear.
No, it isn't. If you put a plastic bottle inside, it would be too heavy. What you do is you prepare it for 3 minutes, put it in the bed, and it makes bedtime inviting for children.
Ah, Charles, take it away.
Let me tell you something. What you just threw at me is the Cabbage Patch Kid of next year. You know they introduced this in the toy show. Jack,
I know, but you should be on a commercial, a 30-second commercial spot, not stealing my valuable time merely because you had a reputation.
I'm telling you something that they're far more interested than they are in the strike at the moment. They're interested in their babies, and I'm having a hard time with you, Jack, as usual.
How much money did you raise as a television evangelist?
I earned, you know that, Jack. You interviewed me in 1956.
And I asked you how much you were getting.
That's
it was
right,
some
and I told you.
sum of money, like $20,000 a year.
It was $150 a week total for my wife and me together. Never took a love offering at all. I was on a salary because I wouldn't be. Forced Billy Graham to go on a salary. You remember that?
Yes, I know. Well, we've done the teddy bear. They'll be on sale, right?
Everywhere. But no, you didn't do them because there's also a lamb, there's also a puppy, and there's also a rabbit.
Well, I could do with it.
Now you can put them down. Hug it a little while. It'll do you good, Jack.
Listen, I saw you on a program the other day in which you were quite magnificent, putting in perspective the Oral Robertses of the world. How much do we suffer from the Oral Robertses of the world in Canada? How many people, why do people watch television evangelists and send money?
Most of the people who listen, look at when they're on. They're on mornings. Who's home weekday mornings and Saturday mornings? Wives, unemployed, old people. So that's the audience. Now, what happens is, take a woman of middle age. Her family's grown up, the nest is empty, their husband isn't much good to them anymore. They don't have anything to live for, there's an emptiness, and this gives you a chance to join a club, to be a member, a partner.
But no matter
working with God.
No matter how you might not like the Canadian evangelists, they don't have any of the power or the glory or the shouting or the amoral or immoral affairs of your former colleagues to the south, do they?
None of them are my former colleagues. The only one who was is Billy Graham, and Billy is straight as a string. Jack...
Well, one doesn't think of Billy Graham in the same context,
of course
does
not.
one?
He's not in the same context. What this is, it's the money changers have taken over the temple. I was interviewed on a show in Toronto, and they asked me, what would Jesus do if he was on earth? Would he do a guest shot on one of their shows? I said he'd go in, get some of the television cables, and chase the money changers out of the studio, which is what he would do. What has happened, Jack, is that they have turned. This has no relationship to New Testament Christianity, none. No more than the Bible has to a newspaper horoscope. It's a sanitized, emasculated, sentimentalized heresy, which isn't at all New Testament, isn't at all like what Jesus was talking about, where Jim Baker, who always reminds me when I see him, is the kind of empty-faced fellow with the unbending geniality of a game show host. Tammy reminds me...
You're talking about the American PTL Club.
I'm talking about the PTL Club. Tammy reminded me of an aging tourist town madam with long eyelashes and heavy pancake makeup and capped teeth and dripping with diamonds. And it is a travesty.
But the fact remains, said Webster, putting on his other hat, the Backers resigned after Jim Backer admitted to an affair with the church secretary.
Yep.
And I can say to you, and you can tell me, that the Lord is all forgiving. And he can be forgiven for that and can carry on within the widest confines of the doctrine. Is that not correct?
No, I wouldn't tell you that. You see, that was the story, when the story broke, he'd had this little affair. Look, who can be too critical of that? Who hasn't been tempted? Tammy got mixed up in drugs. Who hasn't at a time of stress taken some drugs? So who can be really critical of that?
Nobody.
But that's not the real thing. The real thing was that having had the affair, for 6.5 years he paid blackmail and $115,000 and set up a fund of $230,000. Tammy was on drugs for 10 years. He put her on every day, spaced out, sitting there, telling other people that God could help them with their problems.
Okay, enough of that.
It was a daily
what
lie.
are the political dangers of these right-wing evangelists? Are they a pressing menace in the climate of the United States?
No. I don't think that Pat Robertson's going to go anywhere. There are a lot of surveys that show that even Christians who follow fundamentalist evangelists are not going to vote for him for president. I don't think he's going to go anywhere. The danger is that Falwell, who happens to be for Bush, Haggis, Swaggart, and some of the rest are going to come at the end and say to Bush, look, you're in trouble. Give us a few of the things we want. ERA, prayer in the schools, and we'll throw all of our influence behind you. And the difference is they can turn people out on election day, which is not unimportant.
Couldn't do that under Canadian television laws and regulations, could they?
Why could you not? If they're delegates to the convention, of course they could.
But you couldn't do that. You couldn't do a political program on the air and religious television in Canada each and every day.
Well, sure. Anyone who wants to can run for prime minister. You've got to get the party's permission, of course.
Yeah. Oral Roberts.
Oral Roberts, Jack, watch him. And what you will see is a man who is having a little trouble. Unquestionably having trouble. You can see paranoia when the man is talking. He saw a 90-foot God. God comes and talks to Oral Roberts and calls him, by the way, they're on a first-name basis, and says, Oral, if you don't get $8 million from your followers, you're dead by a certain date. What he didn't realize was that he was turning God into a terrorist who was holding him hostage until they paid $8 million ransom.
Are you going to go
It's
back
incredible.
to television evangelism?
What do you think?
I don't think so.
No.
Little teddy bears? Big success?
Teddy Warm.
Teddy Warm. This one's cold.
No, it's not. You know it's not.
Got some hot water there, somebody? Poor little teddy bear's cold. Well, that was a mixed-up interview, but I wanted to put you on.
I wanted to have the teddy bear here because you think you're a curmudgeon, and we all know you're a sort of a little teddy bear.
So do I. Thank you, Charles Templeton. After the break. John Frasco of the Indy 500 who wants to bring the rest of Vancouver. And at the top of the show, Roy Gauthier of the Building Trades Council of BC on the Labour Code, 5 p.m. precisely.